So, good afternoon, dear participants and your audience, those watching the geopolitical dialogue. So today we have quite a specific, specific session, specific conversation that relates to a very important part of the geopolitical structure, especially recently. Within the last month, this issue has it sounds completely different. So this is nuclear weapon, nuclear arms, and the start, as it seemed to me, of a new nuclear arms race. It's a new stage of nuclear arms race, including the intention, and at least we have some very dangerous signals coming from Russia. On bringing that technology and maybe arms to space. You know that recently Russia has blocked the decision of the UNSC on prohibition for that activity, despite the fact that there are certain international conventions and documents. Well, this is really something that is a threat, and all the countries are preparing their response. We still hear these new statements that agreements, especially in the part of strategic armament, so these agreements are like maybe finalized now or later. So this process turns in a completely different direction. A couple years ago, we couldn't imagine that. And this global transformation context in global opposition context, it has a new meaning. It's not about even it's about those situations where any conflict can actually start using the mass destruction weapons. So we have some already confirmed cases when the chemical weapons were used by Russians in the territory of Ukraine by the Russian army. So we have really a lot of official statements from Russian representatives. This nuclear blackmailing. And finally, we have we still have these crucial infrastructure objects that were used, like the peaceful ones. I mean, like Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Now they use it as basically a weapon, not just to in a conventional war, not just for the blackmail. At the same time, we can see, well, a lot of discussions are there in the world related to this. In Ukraine, we have these waves and spikes, yes, in informational space. But I think we still underestimate now. We underestimate those challenges, and we don't use the position of our state as an active member of non-proliferation and control for nuclear arms. And a state which, let's not forget, political circumstances once led us to actually a refusal from the nuclear weapon. Okay? Remember that we had the top third capacity in that term. So now we have these statements from the French president, Emmanuel Macron, on the nuclear umbrella for the Europe with the use of French nuclear arms. Still, the statement, I think we'll get more from that later. So we have the US response on new missiles. China obviously set a task. I mean, their government set a task to, let's say, reach new parameters, quantitative parameters. Of course, to keep US, France, and other countries behind. So still, it's just the very, very beginning. These threatening tendencies are just like, it's just the start, but we have this development already. So Ukraine today has certain opportunities, new opportunities. Recently, we've had many of those. So participation in the IAEA Managing Council. So we, of course, cannot overestimate the role of IAEA. If not the UN agencies, then who will actually counteract this nuclear terrorism and blackmailing? How do we use these opportunities? What do we take from it? How active we should be? What diplomatic kind of work should be there? So we'll talk about that today, and we also will touch upon the issue that we hear a lot about in Ukraine, more from Ukrainian citizens, in the context of asymmetrical war of Russia against Ukraine, but also among the experts. This is being discussed: how to ensure that Russia is not doing that. If any other leverage is there, if we are still not a part of NATO, maybe returning to the nuclear status idea, as they call it. So I think we should discuss it as well. And today with the participants, with very professional people, the experts, who has been into that, not just in theory, but they're practitioners, first of all, and they know what Ukraine is doing in this area. So Yuri Kostenko, former Minister of Environmental Protection and Nuclear Security, 1995-1998. And with us today we have, yes, also various positions. He took in positions in delegations, but I just want to stress on that, like your participation and your membership in the IAEA Council, yeah? So Olha Kosharna is with us today. Olha, she's a renowned expert on nuclear energy and nuclear security. The most important thing that Olha has a solid reputation, not only in Ukraine, but also among international experts. I know you've been actively talking to other people on that. So I really want something that you talk about to be heard by Ukrainian audience, right? I think those problems that you actually focus on, these do require our response, and of course we must have this public discussion. Okay, Yuri, I'd like you, I guess, to start with a global context. I started talking about this. So, what is nuclear armament, strategic nuclear armament, in geopolitical debates? What is the place of that topic? Is it so actively discussed? And do you observe any changes? Because something that you mentioned in your books, published all around the world, it's like we're returning. I can see, by the way, that one of your books is here. Yeah. So I think, well, why we're coming back to things that were mentioned there, okay? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You are absolutely right. In terms of the following, Russian aggression against Ukraine, in fact, opened a new stage of nuclear armament. And for us to understand where this process can lead us and the humanity where it can be led to, I'd like to go back a little bit, okay? Let's go to history. What is the history of the nuclear arms race itself? Like, it had its peak right before the Soviet Union collapsed. Do you remember those space projects, bringing the nuclear arms to space, not just the nuclear arms? And in this context, Ukraine played a unique role. Not just the third top nuclear capacity in the world, but unfortunately, we gave it into the hands of the potential aggressor, Russia. So this whole process is described on the basis of documents, not just on the basis, of some memories or assumptions on the process. But what is really important, as for me, nuclear disarmament of Ukraine, it stopped the race itself. On the other hand, still, our nuclear disarmament, Ukrainian nuclear disarmament, it stopped the process the process of designing new nuclear arms by states. So in the beginning of 1990s, 15 states in the world, they actually were working on their own nuclear programs, military nuclear programs. 15 countries. In 1995, the agreement on non-proliferation of nuclear arms was about to expire. That was signed in 1968. And the issue of its prolongation was practically unrealistic. 15 countries wanted to become nuclear countries, and these countries were massively supported by others. They completely refused to actually, they wanted to leave this agreement. And nuclear disarmament of Ukraine actually allowed not just to extend the agreement, but also it was prolonged. It was prolonged for, it became like a permanently active one without this prolongation even function. So Ukraine, in international nuclear policy, Ukraine played a unique role that was underestimated, not just by the nuclear states, but by the whole world. And this underestimation, it led to the following: the so-called Budapest Memorandum, the guarantee of our security. Well, from the very beginning, the US and other nuclear states mentioned that this itself was not an international legal act with guarantees, but it's just assurance of guarantees, let's say. But in this document, we have the signs, the signatures of the heads of the states, and it's a unique document, for the international practice. And Budapest Memorandum did not work; it failed. Moreover, when the aggression started, Russian aggression started, on the full-scale aggression started in 2022 against Ukraine, and when two NPPs were seized, Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia. Unfortunately, the UN agency, IAEA, the one which is actually obliged, and it has an mandate, it has to promote the avoidance of attempts to design these military nuclear programs, yes? That's why they actually established this body once. So IAEA showed its incapacity, complete incapacity and dysfunctionality when new threats arised on proliferation and dissemination of nuclear arms and nuclear terrorism acts. Both are stipulated in international legislation, and IAEA actually has all the toolkit, to control the process of non-proliferation of nuclear arms and to prevent the acts of nuclear terrorism. What actually happened back in those days, the first months of Russian aggression, full-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine, in IAEA, what happened there? Nothing happened in that body. After the Chernobyl NPP was seized, and by the way, the monitoring, IAEA is completely, they stopped their monitoring. So how they control the nuclear materials? They constantly are monitoring the storage sites, the nuclear waste storage sites, or when the electric supply for the Chernobyl NPP was cut, during the first day's work. This is a tragedy, a catastrophe. IAEA, that IAEA had no control over the process, like what's happening with the nuclear waste, nuclear materials at Chernobyl NPP. By the way, all the nuclear materials and the nuclear substances used at the NPP were accumulated on the spot itself. Instead of actually paying attention to the fact that Russia started the nuclear terrorism at Chernobyl NPP, Mr. Grossi, the head of IAEA, he just gives a statement that basically the radiation level is safe. After Zaporizhzhia NPP was seized, Mr. Grossi, moreover, what Mr. Grossi did, a more fantastic statement was given. In International Forum in Davos, when on May 25th, 2022, he gave a statement, surprising statement that at Zaporizhzhia NPP, they found 30 tons of plutonium and 40 tons of enriched uranium. So this complete nonsense from the head of IAEA on plutonium and uranium at Zaporizhzhia NPP, it wasn't actually refuted. So I gave a public request as a former candidate for the IAEA head position. I had a request to Grossi. I sent it to Grossi to refute that, because how could that actually identify and detect that amount of nuclear materials when IAEA is responsible for peaceful atom not to turn into military one? In 1995, with Hans Lixen back then, I signed an agreement on for all Ukraine's nuclear activity to be controlled by IAEA, and this agreement came in effect in 1990s. So the statement given by the IAEA head was not refuted, and Mr. Grossi did not take any steps that he had to do as the head of IAEA. Okay, just to have a meeting of the management council after the NPP was seized and Chernobyl NPP were seized, and raise an issue on the non-scheduled emergency meeting to actually consider that situation. Russian delegation, nobody actually asked them a question. Russian representatives in the management council, they did not give an answer. Nobody asked them what Russians were doing there at these both NPPs, violating the international law. So this whole, this failure to act, IAEA failure to act, this complete failure to act, what it led to? Gradually, in different countries of the world, these countries started shaping an opinion that nuclear disarmament did not give us the result that nuclear states promised, the movement to the nuclear-free world. And these examples, the case that we have in Ukraine, it actually led many politicians to opinions. If politicians, then many states did the same. Now many states start thinking about their own programs to actually design the nuclear arms. Another element, in my opinion, that promoted the nuclear Pandora box to be opened. What actually led to it? After the nuclear terrorism acts committed by Russia, international community, and primarily the democratic states, they did nothing they had to do. First of all, protecting Ukrainian NPPs from the shelling and attacks of Russian terrorists. During the first year of war, full-scale war, quite often these missiles, cruise missiles, were flying over Хмельницька, Південно-Українська, Рівненська NPP. So Putin was demonstrating to the whole world that nuclear war it's not just basically, it's not about just nuclear arms, it's about destroying NPPs and basically launching the Fukushima or the Chernobyl case with all the consequences, repeating that. So democratic world had to use all the methods and take all the measures, starting from economic sanctions against Rosatom that IAEA had to initiate, and up to closure of the sky, closing the sky above the NPPs, and this would minimize and decrease the nuclear ambitions of Putin. And the democratic world would start looking at it differently. I mean, at the problem of nuclear armament and their own nuclear ambitions. So, these colossal failures in nuclear policy demonstrated by IAEA and the UNSC, therefore the democratic world that's united to assist Ukraine to help us to resist the Russian aggression. Well, this complex of failures led us to the following. It's already the second stage of nuclear arms race started. So it's not just something that Russia already is stating, with their plans to bring the nuclear arms to space. Other countries already mentioned this. Russia's statements that one can use nuclear arms against like France or just, what Macron is saying, what he tells, okay, remember that we have the nuclear weapon as well. So still, it's just a diplomatic exchange of these statements, but it's already a facade, and behind that facade, some serious activities are taking place. Military nuclear programs will be designed there. So I remember the Sikorsky statement when the U.S. Congress blocked the assistance. So Sikorsky said that this issue back then, so this issue is not just a problem. It's not just a problem for supplying us with weapons, but it's how can we ensure that Russia will not use its nuclear capacity? The nuclear umbrella issue, especially in the context of Trump's statements. Well, it's still not obvious if this umbrella will be put over the whole Europe, but Polish will start thinking of other things, how to defend themselves from nuclear Russia. These quite ambiguous statements from top officials definitely is a proof from my conclusion that it's already a new nuclear arms race. It already started. So just to finish this short review of what this may lead to, I can definitely claim that it's hard today to it's hard to say what will be the end of Russian aggression in Ukraine. Yes, there must be an end to this process, and it will be ended by signing specific agreements, specific documents, and Russia will be the signatory as well. But the fact that Russian war against Ukraine it brought the nuclear armament issue to the surface. Completely new level. It's happening. Nuclear states, as we heard it, already are opening and launching new financial programs, actually, to update their nuclear capacity, not just update, not just to modernize, but increase the destructive capacity, destructive potential. And it's not just something that happens in China and Russia, but also in the US and France, in so many, many other countries. And even in 2023, those countries who do not claim themselves to be nuclear, like Israel, Pakistan, and India, they started increasing substantially their nuclear capacities. So, Pandora's box is open officially. Who's gonna close the Pandora's box when on political map of the world there are no naive states like Ukraine used to be in 1990s. This Pandora's box may actually lead to nuclear apocalypse. Thank you so much for this, for the history, for this, for the facts. It's important to know. Okay, Olha, on the issue that was raised, the nuclear terrorism. Well, first of all, we speak now. We forgot a little bit about Chernobyl and PP. It came out of our attention. There wasn't any active discussion in context of Chernobyl disaster anniversary, but Zaporizhzhia and PP, the key thing that we want to discuss. And I've seen your comments. You constantly keep your fingers on the pulse because in technical context, from the technical standpoint, but what is our biggest concern? Russia is blackmailing us. They have this nuclear blackmailing. So they're seizing nuclear objects, yes, and they use it in their propaganda. So they're blaming Ukraine and accusing us, basically, for many violations and activities of IAEA representatives in Vienna. These, notes and letters are there, like some accusations, unjustified accusations. It's something you can't even, absorb. So, thousands of drones and UAVs in Ukraine that actually were hitting the NPP, Ukrainian NPPs, Ukrainian drones were hitting the NPP. But it sounds like nonsense, of course, and it is nonsense. But in the world, when I see it coming to the news, they start discussing it because this is something of huge concern. Okay, two things I want to ask. If this is actually, not if this is true, but can you just tell us what Russia is using to attack us in informational context? What should we do in this situation? On nuclear, blackmail, and the seizure of Zaporizhzhia NPP. Thank you so much. Thank you. When it comes to informational activity of Russia and these drone attacks, these were prepared beforehand. In 6 months prior to April 7th and April 9th and 18th with these drones, cheap drones, very small, tiny, it's clear that for Ukraine, it doesn't make sense, just to direct these at our own NPP, nuclear power station. So this politicians, joined the process. MPs, they're Russian MPs of Duma, and Russia is very active in IAEA as a member. So official notes and letters are sent with the figures about the drones, 270, 250, like they were hitting these and neutralizing in 3 months. More than 1,700 of drones they managed to hit, So they just fall down. But there's no access for IAEA to check these falling sites, collapse sites. They don't have access to the premises where the military equipment is kept. On the roofs, there are the spots that Russians used to shoot. We've known that since 2023. They mined the cooling pool and the gate. The intelligence told about that, yes? They mined the perimeter, basically. So Zaporizhzhia NPP is transformed into a military base, Kadyrov's combatants and the Russian military, they actually reside there. They are moving around the spot more freely than IAEA representatives. So Russia is trying to normalize the situation. They're trying to turn it into a routine for everyone to get used to the fact that they actually are securing it. But based on various assessments, the deficit of personnel, instead of 1,000 people of operative staff for 5 shifts, they have 380. Just 380. And with Ukrainian licenses, and again, Zaporizhzhia NPP is functioning now with Ukrainian license. If all the blocks are in this cold stop, as we can say, so it's still Ukrainian licenses, and 22 people who signed contracts with licenses out of 200. In my opinion, what Ukrainian party had to do first. Okay, Facebook reminded me today, by the way, that in 2022, after the deoccupation of Chernobyl alienation zone, Держатомрегулювання suspended the license for the enterprises. I speak of the waste management for Chernobyl NPP, just for 2 storage sites of the waste. of fuel waste. The explanation was that they failed to comply with the standards and rules. Excuse me, but non-compliance with the requirements since March 4th, 2022. It's about breach of physical protection. Various people stayed there without access, and so on. In 3 pages, I had these 3 pages of violations according to Ukrainian legislation. So, Держатом регулювання had to close that license, cancel the license according to legislation. Yes, we understand that international security agencies failed to do anything. They are incapable of that. We now know this within these years. But we have to use the platforms like Russia's doing this, like UNSC. Nebenzia is giving his speeches all the time. He's like gathering the meetings. And now we have a unique chance to take part in shaping the agenda in Management Council of IAEA, but we're not doing this. First of all, we still don't have the head of the permanent delegations, still cannot come to Vienna. I can't imagine the first secretary coming to Grossi and talking about Ukraine. Other delegations, ambassadors are leading these, like in US. This is diplomatic activity. I don't even mention that now, in the conditions of war, diplomats and their couloir activity, let's call it, with our strategic partners, they prepare the meetings of the Management Council, scheduled, non-scheduled, emergency. It's diplomatic activity. And when in delegations now they assign a Minister of Energy, when we have this crisis with the energy after the shelling, we need to have a person who is staying permanently in Vienna and for whom it's possible to have these couloir talks with our partners to prepare certain decisions and agendas. Excuse me for interrupting. We had this practice in Ukraine. In the Management Council, yes, we had that case. These were not diplomats, but this activity was taking place. So, because the intensity is growing, well, first of all, back then it was peaceful time, and it's clear the majority of states assign diplomats to the council. So, as a rule, the head of the permanent delegation. But on March 7th, a resolution was adopted, initiated by Ukraine. At this, the scheduled meeting there was at UNSC, yes, at the scheduled meeting. But our representatives were preparing this. The minister came. And he came there and he saw that no ministers of energy in the delegation, so there was basically no schedule. Why? It's of my concern because yesterday there was a message from the Ministry of Defense Intelligence Unit. They now have the information and they have some evidence that drones are directed from the Zaporizhzhia PP to Nikopol and other places. It's next to 6th block. There is a spot for the waste processing and so on. I monitor the response of official Ukrainian, of our officials. I just want to clarify. So it's already, okay, NPP, nuclear object is seized. It's recognized. And Russia uses this in a war by sending drones from this spot. Not just this, it's just specifically about drones. The non-scheduled meeting of UNSC was taking place because of the drones in the beginning of April, but still, experts of IAEA mission now register also the artillery shooting from the spot. I read every single statement and next to it. Previously, they did not even record that and register that. Now they distinguish the types of weapons they'll use, like artillery and other types of equipment. And in weekly reports, they actually record it. When it comes to IAEA, I understand that terms of reference, TOR, for the mission, it was given by Держатом регулювання, but they have to revise it. For the experts of mission to get access, like to spots where the drones were detected and so on, you have to respond to it. And what I expected, that MFA would give an official statement that the Ukrainian representative and management council will give a call to Grossi, that one will initiate the non-scheduled emergency meeting with new evidence to be brought to table. These are Russian drones, and these are used to attack Nikopol and Marganets community. That Держатом регулювання, for them to give a statement, no statements at all, like no. But all the grounds are there. It's purely justified to gather an unscheduled UNSC meeting. So in June, this scheduled management council meeting is planned. And during this meeting, they will agree on the list for the rotation. 13 states will be there based on the statute. All the states are split in regions, and this is an opportunity to step up to this initiative to suspend the membership of Russia as a violator of international law on nuclear security and international convention on preventing the nuclear terrorism. This precedent was already there in like 1970s. Southern African Republic, they actually lost their membership in Management Council due to political reasons, due to apartheid. And in the statute of IAEA, it says clearly that a region has to be represented by the state with the most developed nuclear capacity. And in Africa, it was like purely South African Republic with the NPP. Instead of Southern African Republic, they elected Egypt. And they don't even have these research reactors. So we have to use this platform. We have to try to do it as an official tool. We understand completely that Russia, 4 resolutions there were on the Management Council regarding Zaporizhzhia NPP. Urgently liberating and for Ukraine to establish its control, and what Russia said. We consider any such statement or any such document or claim as interference in our business, basically, and a threat to our sovereignty. But we have to do something. We have to create a basis for future lawsuits and court processes. I know that as of now, still no official documents are set on Russia's violation of Article 2 on Convention. So the package was prepared, as I know, by the Ministry of Justice, and MFA did not agree on that, not approve it. So there's no movement. But still already those war criminals who took part in the seizure of NPP, Security Service already started doing this. National Police, they prepared these accusations. The military who took part in the occupation process. So it goes very slowly. In particular, when it comes to Russia's nuclear terrorism, the accusations and even official requests from Ukraine. Thank you so much. Well, basically, all these facts are I can even confirm some of these facts. Yes, so it's completely says it is. So the statement given by President Zelensky, I remember it very well, that Ukraine, in the context of this war, we have a unique opportunity now to give more impact on decisions via the Management Council. He spoke of that as of our opportunity, and certain tasks were set. So I also think that recently we've had this process has been slowing down. The delegation is taking part. Well, you're right. I completely agree with you when it comes to diplomatic experience. Yes, it doesn't matter how much you want to achieve some result, but this is an international body, international agency. You have constantly to talk to these people, stay in contact. 32 countries are there. Yeah. 35 states, okay, are members all around the world. Well, first of all, the language of communication, of course, technical expertise should be there, but yes, negotiation and diplomacy are important, especially when we speak of the suspension or cancellation of Russia's membership. So it's of political nature. It's not just the practical details of NPP's functioning and what's happening in that sector. Moreover, these people, who have enough expertise, uh, work in the Ministry of Energy and Enerhoatom with some diplomatic experience at top positions. We have these people in Ukraine. I think it would be really better if it would be correct if President not to change the position, but if the target is not achieved, if we will not cancel the membership of Russia at June meeting, so we have to change the delegation composition. It's not about names, okay? I agree with you. We cannot do it like partially. We cannot be partially engaged 24/7 in such mode. How to handle this? I'm not sure that our representative in Vienna would be able to fully cover that. We need to start using some non-standard solutions. I would support this. Special representative of Ukraine, maybe of the president. We had such people assigned. We had these appointments, in energy-related sector. So with the rank of ambassador, with certain expertise, top positions, also ministers, deputy ministers, and diplomatic experience. Plus, this person has to be aware of what's happening in the sector. This person can lead the delegation. At this stage, I agree with you. Okay, so not the first secretary, not even the ambassador has the full capacity. It's not about professionalism, but the status. It's a status-related thing. Okay, certain protocol is there, so certain algorithm, so we have to stick to it. If we can strengthen the capacity now, but so little time, so we have to make conclusions and plan how we shall organize this in future. Okay. If we talk about things that you touched upon, technical, I mean, and Yuri spoke of this, I was always surprised by this distinguishing of functions, where IAEA said that they are responsible purely for some technical things, parameters, but all other things are beyond their responsibility. But who is responsible then? Okay. Kislitsa, the permanent representative, he's acting in this specific direction. So he is responding, he's giving statements, but it's not enough to keep this in focus, and it's not enough to present our own initiatives. I'm very surprised. I'm so surprised that we don't use this influential position that we have as a subject of the processes, when it comes to control on non-proliferation. It's not about even disarmament. In 2024, it's already the 30th anniversary of this Budapest Memorandum. But the impression is that we forgot the statement that was statements that were given by the signatories apart from Russia and those who sent letters later to MFA of Ukraine official like China and France. They stressed that the issue of security guarantees, or as they called it, assurances, whatever, that these are obligations that they took, a commitment, that this should be raised when Ukraine shall be either attacked by a nuclear weapon or blackmailed, or threatened. And why there are no active statements, like official statements? Why no activities are there? I know the opinion of China. The representative officially claimed that in their understanding, enforcement of Budapest Memorandum, that China does not attack Ukraine with nuclear weapon. That's how they now interpret it. A public statement was given. I think that Ukraine should put this issue to the surface. Nuclear blackmail, first of all. Yuri, I wanted to ask you, is it possible to speak about Budapest Memorandum? Can we speak of that and Budapest Memorandum and seizure of NPPs, nuclear objects? Is there a connection between the nuclear threats and such seizures? Can we include this in political discussions on guarantees or assurances, whatever? Thank you. I think that Ukraine today can actually ask any questions related to nuclear terrorism, nuclear security, blackmailing, threats, whatever. So we are absolutely entitled in any aspect to it. Like we had the top third nuclear capacity once in the world. So before answering this question, I just want to confirm and say that I had this in my practice. I just want to say that, yes, our institutions like MFA and the IAEA representatives with certain functions and duties, I want to confirm that there's lack of activity and lack of they're not so strongly visible in international agencies. I'm giving a very diplomatic statement. When I was in the staff of IAEA, the key thing for Ukraine was to change the IAEA opinion regarding the reasons of Chernobyl disaster. You know that USSR presented the report to IAEA saying that this is just the operative staff mistake, and these are not the problems of the reactor. In 1990, I was in a special commission of Verkhovna Rada that handled we were studying the reasons why this disaster happened. Our commission established back then that the explosion, why the explosion happened, the flaws of construction, of reactor construction. Hans Blicht, back then he came to us, the IAEA director, and we had a meeting with him, and we clearly, using facts, using results of the study, we presented the whole procedure. The whole algorithm that NPP operators were using, this procedure was complying to instructions designed by the Moscow to actually to run the reactor. But despite the fact that the data were presented, IAEA did not recognize that the key reason were the structural flaws of the reactor. So When I was leading the Ukrainian delegation in IAEA, was in the management council, we still were initiating discussions on that. And IAEA eventually recognized that, yes, constructive flaws of the reactor and deficiencies were the key problem, not just the operator's mistakes. It's an example when the state actively is engaged and is visible in international agencies. The current issue, there was neither MFA nor Держатомрегулювання, also Energoatom, in the very first days of both NPP seizure by Russians. None of these gave an official statement that Russia is committing nuclear terrorism acts. Energoatom, for the first time, they actually spoke of nuclear terrorism. Mr. Kotin gave the statement in July 2022, the earliest. At that moment, it was in the media already, and two of my statements to IAEA director and the demand for them to consider that issue of nuclear terrorism of Russia against Ukraine. Then Management Council. The same thing, we can give a clear statement that the very first question that our representative have to ask in the Management Council, what Russia is still doing there in this council, why it's still a member. It's a nuclear terrorist. They've breached all possible international agreements already, instructions and guidelines on nuclear security. By the way, with these guidelines and instructions, IAEA designs those, and later these become a part of national legislation. Everything IAEA is designing, it's not just about control over the nuclear arms, but it's about safe functioning of NPPs all around the world. They have colossal duties and obligations. IAEA is not actually fulfilling this. They can do a lot, but they somehow limit their capacity. So Russia is constantly with its fakes. They are, the international agencies are tired of considering their requests against Ukraine. And we are the victim of aggression, but we are toothless. We're not using these platforms to attack Russia, to attack the aggressor, to counterattack. But we're just, using a newspaper to push away the fly. It looks like this. Just to finish with this, how Ukraine can actually use the Budapest Memorandum. I just want to confirm, yes. This is interpreted differently by nuclear states, what is written there, and their commitments. Just like US, they say, well, we do not attack Ukraine, meaning we actually enforce the memorandum. But it's not about you, it's a collective agreement, collective document with Russia's signature as well. Russia's, the aggressor's signature. The country which is threatening its nuclear arms, the whole world is threatened with it. There must be a collective response of nuclear states to one who does not understand the mission and the signature that was put in this document. In the first day of war, Verkhovna Rada, that referred to Budapest Memorandum, back then we had to start talking about nuclear terrorism and talking to the international MPs with a proposal to take this unique case for the parliaments, for the governments of other countries to start actually impacting them. Because of this completely zero opinion and zero actions from IAEA. So Ukrainian MFA, presidential office, they don't use this whole spectrum of measures we can take under the Budapest Memorandum, and it's a third year full-scale war of Russia, which is still a nuclear state. And as long as we have this weak position, Russia will still attack. They'll keep attacking us everywhere and in diplomatic context as well. Yes. What we can see in the conditions where our partners, were escalating, the weapons were not sent timely, but Russia within this period was escalating. With missile hits on Dnipro station, this is not an MPP. Still quite a dangerous object, and the missiles were hitting, they showed how can they attack also other objects, including other objects. This may be a different object. So we have functioning power plant, and it's pretty clear that we have to consider that as well. Yes, the seizure itself is unprecedented. It has never happened, seizure of a nuclear object by armed forces and occupation of the nuclear object itself. If there is no answer for it, international institutions can't do anything with it. It's obvious that we have to do something extraordinary. Some very special discussion should be there, or special meetings. I think that despite we still have to wish. We still have to initiate this discussion with nuclear states. Not just UK, US, and France, but also China. I don't have facts to confirm it, but this is a version that is recognized by many, that Russia's blackmail was stopped by this joint warning, primarily by US, that if they use tactical nuclear weapon, then there will be a conventional response with usual weapons, but conventional weapons, but very powerful. And this response, and it's about destroying the Russian capacities on land and on sea. I'm not sure if we actually will ever find out what the real thing was, but then a question. It falls under the enforcement of document. Make it more public, more open. Such warnings, to make it more public. It would be better, because this would give a signal, not just to Russia, it would be a message to the countries also that you mentioned. Those not just having the nuclear arms or calling themselves nuclear states, but those with tech capacity, and they have enough of funding, and they have the capacity to get this nuclear status quite quickly. More than 20 of these we have in the world. If we already have discussions in Germany, in expert community, it's quite a concern for me, because this thing goes very deep now. We can see it. It's in expert community already. I didn't want to finalize with that, but still, we shifted to this. We mentioned the Budapest Memorandum, and the Ukrainian parliament may be more active, and we may have initiatives from official bodies, and it does not give any impact to like the peace summit, peace formula, bilateral agreements. It doesn't affect it. Why in bilateral agreements, apart from UK, why don't we have it? We have this draft agreement with the US. Maybe it will be there in that text if we talk about ambitious agreement. And by the way, if we have agreement with the US ratified by Congress, and there will be these issues will be duplicated, at least when it comes to nuclear blackmailing. This will be a step forward, because we had the G7 statements, let's say, at the level of executive structures, it was done. We have to pay attention to it. Why? Because the whole world is watching and observing. We heard the response of our partners regarding Budapest Memorandum. Something very brief on the letter of the law, but they don't check the letter of the law. Many countries are thinking of how shall this be ended. My subjective opinion now, if we have even not the use but testing of technical nuke, just the testing. As far as I understand, for 30 years, these weren't the tests, yeah? Since 1996, okay? Almost 30 years. Without this, without the tests, we can't say that it will move forward faster. But Russia has this wish, they do wish to have it, its next level of escalation. If we allow this, even the testing stage, I think many in the world will understand that these documents, like Budapest Memorandum and many other assurances and these bilateral agreements, whatever, are just useless. And then everybody will start looking for ways to survive in this dangerous world. So these discussions, we have it in Ukraine as well. And I will not invent a bicycle, but an expert community among activists in the context of this of our self-defense, of our defense against Russia with a huge nuclear capacity. It's purely asymmetrical. In the conditions when we hear the statements that there will be no even decision to invite Ukraine to become a member of NATO in Washington, in conditions where we don't understand what security model may be now used, apart from self-defense, which does not comply with the threat level that we have. I speak of nuclear state, and Russia is. What shall we do then? And it's natural. It's quite obvious, and many people already give this negative assessment. Many people assess negatively our refusal from nuclear arms. This was a mistake, of course. But we have such opinions now. Like, what would be the price of that? Do we have this capacity to bring the nuke arms back? I have my own opinion on this. I will not now present it later, but well, first it's about if these opportunities are realistic for Ukraine. Secondly, if we need it or not. And again, Yuri, I ask you. Thank you. First, about the reality, okay, that Ukraine is now in. We can't defend ourselves autonomously against the nuclear state and its aggression. We can't even. It's not even about the nuclear arms, but we can't even adequately respond to colossal amount of conventional arms that Russia is using in conventional attacks. Moreover, with this colossal arsenal that Russia accumulated after the WW2, we can see that the whole world cannot handle it, the democratic world that actually is now uniting to help us. But we see huge failures, we observe huge failures in modern war. NATO and West, we can see that they were not prepared for it. They are not ready for it. And that is why Russia is slowly moving forward. Russian forces are gradually reaching its goal because there's a lack of conventional arms that Ukraine definitely needs to resist. Just imagining that in this moment, we can separately, autonomously start designing our nuclear program. Uh, only a person who lives in like a vacuum in a bubble can think of this. Someone who's very far from reality. And unprofessional person. So these conversations on the opportunity to bring our nuclear capacity back, get our nuclear status back, well, I call that, these are like total idiots, or maybe these are people who are provoking, who really use some Kremlin guidelines. I just want to remind you that a couple of days before the full-scale war started, in Munich at the security conference, President of Ukraine somehow mentioned this Budapest Memorandum in the context that if Western countries don't defend Ukraine, Ukraine may return to the nuclear status issue. Putin instantly, that horrible night, we all remember that, when it started, he used this argument saying that one of the Russia's goals in this special so-called operation is to prevent Ukraine from returning its nuclear status. Do you remember this actually? I remember it very well. The nuclear status of Ukraine, the nuclear arms for Ukraine, this question is completely, well, it's not feasible to ask that question. It's quite, it's harmful for us now to talk about it. We are the signatories on a non-proliferation agreement, okay? So any step towards the nuclear status will instantly lead us to sanctions, international sanctions, okay? Which sanctions? How can we provoke those sanctions in such a condition? Because we do lack the support from the West. With the conventional arms, the most important component of this issue. Who will tell us where Ukraine will take money from? We have to. Any state military nuclear program is an expensive thing. Why those who initiate at the top political level? I will not give names now because it relates to former presidents as well. Those mentioning the opportunity to get the status back. I want them to tell where shall we take the money for it. Yeah, we have a lot of nuclear waste. In Chernobyl and PP, there's enough plutonium and high enriched uranium to turn it into the arms. But establishing a complex, to ensure like building a plant, military plant for it, well, and give funding for the program. We have to start. It's an entry point for any military nuclear program they talk about. Again, upon the occasion, I'd like to give this message to presidential office, to ministries. I'm just saying that I'm explaining that for us, it's now impossible to even consider that. It's purely Kremlin-based, provocative. It's a provocation, basically. Kremlin-led provocation to disturb the West. That's how I consider this. First of all, Ukraine needs today to cover the lack of conventional arms, because we can't even push Russian aggressor back to the borders, internationally recognized borders, first of all. When it comes to nuclear programs in general, if the global community doesn't understand where the world is moving, that we are so close, it's a very thin ice now. It's basically a potential nuclear apocalypse there. So we won't stop it with our programs, any of them. Thank you, Yuri. You gave your assessment for those presenting such statement, but we'll have to hear all the opinions. How do you think? Always support, and I've always supported the idea that we have to stick to the non-proliferation agreement clauses. Why we're different from Russia? We do not breach Geneva Convention on the Rules and Customs of War and other international legal acts. Therefore, all these political conversations, I remember, Svoboda Party, they raised that as well. So, secondly, theoretically, we had this opportunity by 2010. On the basis of Kharkiv Technical Institute, they had 120 kilograms of high-enriched uranium there. They kept it there during the times of Yanukovych. Under the threat diminishing project, they actually transferred it to Russia. A joint program, US-Russian program, and Ukraine got money to build this neutron source that actually was under shelling. Theoretically, we could do it, but when it comes to waste, like in Chernobyl zone or at Zaporizhzhia NPP, well, we will not be able to do this. This is radiochemical process. These are radiochemical processes. Very little plutonium, because enrichment of uranium and plutonium, like traces, okay, basically traces. And all these technologies are under export control. So these are, it's not just about money, it's about reputation as well. It's clear with Russia. We understand. The world understands what's happening with Russia. That you have to revise the rules. We need to have other rules and requirements. How can we force Russia to stick to something? They destroyed everything. The whole system. The whole geopolitical system and the security system that we had after WW2. So how to reformat UN? Okay. What should be revised? International Convention on Nuclear Energy Use. Convention on Physical Protection, and Ukraine, first of all, has national legislation. We have to revise our national legislation, not just physical protection of the perimeter, but defense. We have to change the state system of physical protection, adding subjects like Ukrainian armed forces, and we must have this extra project threat. So at the level of IAEA, we must actually initiate this, that it has to be defended. The first project threat was approved in Ukraine in 2012 or 2011 when Yanukovych was president. It stipulates the air defense objects to be placed close to NPP, that routes of civilian aircraft should not cross the perimeter, and so on. And Russia uses Zaporizhzhia NPP. They direct missiles from the south, coming from the south, for these to actually cross the perimeter of NPP. Because when our air defense is trying to hit something that goes to Zaporizhzhia to obstruct that, in all senses, this is a very sensitive issue. I can just state that, yes, I fully agree with that, and I never change my opinion. It's not just about reputational losses of our country, but we have to be one of the most important countries in the world when it comes to non-proliferation, even in the current conditions. When our partners say, when they speak about strengthening of nuclear capacity, we still have to stick to that position and still continue being a leader. If we are a leader for non-proliferation, we can't discuss any nuclear programs. I'd just like to add, Ukraine is a responsible partner, the country that actually sticks to its commitments. But it doesn't mean that without nuclear arms, we can't have any type of shield, let's say, which would cover us from external attacks. These threats or attacks will be there like for years still. The scope of attacks may change, the intensity, but this will be still there. This non-nuclear shield, but like a missile shield we're fully entitled. The missile technology control, by the way, yeah, and when we speak, we've we already left those agreements on mid-range weapons and others, so we can actually create something like a combination of a shield and a sword, as I call it. Hundreds and thousands of long-range missiles, and over 1,000 kilometers, and we need such a huge funding, at least to cover that. It's the first thing. Secondly, a little bit of hypothetical. I heard this question was asked. On possible scenarios, Russian scenarios, nothing can be excluded. We know that one of the things that is of concern is control over Russia's nuke. If Russia falls apart, one of the scenarios, which I don't take as realistic, but there are some people, even in the West, who keep that scenario on the table. And I think that then we can talk about this. If Ukraine is a reliable partner and not just sticks to commitments and agreements and is performing its functions responsibly, if we have this threat in Russia, if there is a lack of control due to defragmentation, while Ukraine can be an active participant of international control over the materials and substances, I can tell you more. If there will be a need, if there's like a need to ensure some temporary storage of nuclear arms, well, we can, with the technologies that we have, with specialists that we have and experts, we can actually help to ensure this control. Because if this scenario becomes real in future, many are afraid of that, but being afraid of something and reality, it may be very different. Then Ukraine can actually offer some support. The technological capacity, I mean, and we as a responsible partner, we already had that case, but in slightly different role then. We were disarmed. So just to finalize the dialogue, I want us to have a more global perspective now. The security guarantees in general, and what Yuri mentioned, that now this is a certain certain threats. We have also problems with the weapon supply. We've seen some problems. And of course, we should not forget about the protocols or approaches, guidelines to protect the NPPs which are under our control. This should be a priority, like we need to focus on this. I will not mention the means, but we have to learn our lessons. Why, when it comes to strengthening of bilateral agreements, why don't we mention the nuclear blackmailing and threats there? Okay, Budapest Memorandum is dysfunctional. Put it on the shelf, but we are still a member of so many international mechanisms, and nowhere we actually reflect that. I read those security agreements on the strengthening of cooperation. G7 spoke of priority areas, but with each country, we speak of nuclear states. I mean, UK, US, France. Why don't we reflect this in agreements? It's like we agree to refuse from the nuclear status because of its negative consequences that prevail. This is still about Ukraine's position in the conditions of nuclear blackmail or, God forbid, attacks. It's not present anywhere at bilateral level in our international initiatives. It's not reflected anywhere. Many things happen to agreements, and the agreement that you mentioned, Yuri, on non-proliferation. So, as a non-nuclear state, we joined the agreement. It's reached. They do whatever they want with it, but our voice is not there. It's because our partners are the part of the of that. Should we talk about it in the conditions when U.S. also was a part of it? We can say that we won't have nuclear status, but Poland says that at the level of president so far, they are ready to place nuclear weapons of other countries in their territory as a guarantee of attack prevention. For many people, it's interesting. The placement of nuke, yeah, of other states, can it guarantee the security or give extra confidence, like our neighbors think? And maybe it sounds weird, but I thought, do we have to respond to this as well? Is it okay to have this placement closer to the border? Or, like, what is the answer? Like, what should be our attitude to it? The placement of nuke closer to our border and within the territory of Ukraine. So if this scenario is there, so okay, I support your statement that in all security agreements, which are still drafted and signed, we must have this nuclear component. It must cover not only the military aspect, I mean, yes, but also the protection of our NPPs, because the consequences and the damage itself, the scope of damage, it prevails over any conventional arms. So first, this is the first thing that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should actually think of, the presidential office, especially with the US. Well, this issue should be there. It should be in the content. Other options for nuclear protection. I remember the Kazakhstan case, when former President Nazarbayev, 1990s, when there was an active process of searching for the ways to disarm the new nuclear states after the USSR collapse, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Russian Federation. Everybody spoke of security. Nazarbayev, he had this opinion and statement given. So he wanted to refuse from nuclear weapon, but considering the Kazakhstan security interest, first of all, putting this as a priority, he will not, as he said, he will not run in front of the train. When back in 1993, there was so-called Tashkent Agreement presented, analog of NATO, like Russian NATO. A military bloc was established. It was signed in Tashkent, the agreement itself, I guess, in 1993. Nazarbayev said that he will not, let's say, stick to the idea of keeping the nuke in the Kazakhstan their own, because they have this Russian umbrella, the joint umbrella. These nuclear umbrellas, these are over Europe. This umbrella is over Europe. Japan also, South Korea, where US, and Australia and US, they take this responsibility that if certain threat is there, US are ready to defend with their nuke. So Ukraine has to move in that direction. We have to demand, it's not just asking, but demanding for protection, nuclear protection for Ukraine. There are actually two aspects of umbrella: intercontinental missiles, located far, far away in the US and can be used to protect Ukraine. Also, the fleet and also the submarines and the vessels with the nuclear missiles that actually can protect Ukraine effectively. And nuclear missiles, these were placed in particular in Germany. Tactical weapon, US tactical weapon placed in Western Germany for potential counterattack in the times of USSR. Poland speaks of tactical nuke, and these have to be placed as close as it can be to the Russian territory, close to border, to defend themselves from the nuclear crazy neighbor. Thank you. I cannot comment upon that. I wanted to ask you, three specific documents, okay, that Ukraine can, where Ukraine can initiate the revision of updating of documents, self-regulation, nuclear blackmailing, and related things. Okay, first of all, International Convention on Nuclear Terrorism Prevention. We have to revise Article 2 that lists all the crimes also committed by Russia. By the way, maybe something to be added, but it's a UN convention. We have a convention where IAEA is the depository, and Convention on Physical Protection. Convention on Nuclear Security has to be revised, and Joint Convention on Nuclear Waste Management and Radioactive Waste. So these three conventions, these were drafted after the Chernobyl NPP. But nobody could even imagine that occupation can take place, yes? Military occupation of nuclear objects, yeah? What I wanted to say, you mentioned the guarantees and agreements, yes. Thank you for reminding me of the content and context. But Zaporizhzhia NPP occupation, how other states will perceive that? Those who don't still have NPPs in the territory but plan to do that. Like, oh, we could do this. It was okay, to seize. In 2 years, there was like no response, even no consolidated sanctions against Rosatom from the EU. I checked the UK sanctions of February 2023, US sanctions, the fresh one, against 2 Rosatom enterprises and personal sanctions, but European countries did not impose that, like France. Okay, so on the one hand, we have Macron who says, we will help, we'll send army, but on the other hand, Memorandum, established in 2023 in Germany. They have they want to produce nuclear fuel for Central Europe using Russian materials. So where's the logic? So sanctions, we need sanctions. Maybe on bilateral basis. If there is a separate, like Hungarian or Slovak opinion, the France, for example, UK, they can impose sanctions on bilateral level. But the punishment for Rosatom, $140 billion of portfolio for them to build new NPPs in the world. But only this can stop them. This aggression, nuclear aggression. We did not consider this issue in details because it's already sanctions against Rosatom and the individuals in nuclear terrorism conditions. Well, everybody wanted to know what's going to happen in the U.S. In U.S., they soon will vote against the import of low-enriched uranium. And it's approved that finally U.S. is revising its approaches. Not just from the standpoint of sanction policy, because trade ban is a kind of a sanction, but when it comes to their national interests, because the representative in the Congress, he produces more uranium in his state than Russia supplies. 25% of American needs are covered by Russia. But yeah, I agree with you. We have to use these mechanisms in the conditions when it's not harmful. Why wasn't it done before? No explanation. No explanation for the external audience. Now we expect for the US President Joseph Biden to sign this important law. Banned by 2040 to supply uranium from Russia. And there are some exceptions, but still, I hope it won't be used massively. France, there is a response. So it's really a public case. It's not just... It hasn't randomly leaked to public discussion. There will be a response to this agreement. And I think that this, of course... I agree that there is a staunch opinion in many countries. They have old reactors, they depend on Russia, and Ukraine has to be careful because we will not raise this issue today, but nuclear block construction at Khmelnytsky NPP, with which specialists participating? Let our specialists handle it. We have to avoid any dependence on Russia. Any dependence. We must stop being dependent on them. G7 starts discussing the sanction against Rosatom. They're a little bit late, a couple of years late. After Chernobyl, they should have started that. But this process is already there, and I think the next package will be related to Rosatom. This should push the discussion forward. Will this stop Rosatom from making money? I'm not sure this will actually block their funding channel. And Gazprom in 2022 hoped everything's going to be fine, but we can see that how much they lost. Deep decline they have. Yeah, so it's just about the dynamics of sanctions, the scope of sanctions, and it should not be prolonged. Yeah, we're about to finish. I have some conclusions for me, some key conclusions. Made first of all about the nuclear terrorism of Russia. Russia wants to turn this upside down and accuse us in their crimes. So now we must pay more attention to it. IAEA should pay more attention with this delegation or updated delegation should work more. Constant awareness raising, political focus. It's a nuclear terrorist. It's nuclear blackmail. This nuclear arms race and threats, Ukraine must be more active at this level. And we have something to tell. This is our reputation. We need to start using this. And the third thing that we need to address to Ukraine. So we have these outbursts of attention to nuclear threat issue. We usually have these when in informational environment they start disseminating this as a threat for Ukrainians. I remember this in 2022. When people were so concerned this strategic missile attack on Ukraine or something like that. Back then, everybody were concerned. Specialists told why it's not going to happen then. But when you start being relaxed, you're not looking for some sedatives. But again, nobody is looking for the countering measures. So we should be very careful and not to be misled by these attacks, but not to be over-relaxed as well. We should not fall out of this context, and this issue should be on the agenda all the time. Thank you so much. I think that... Well, we really wanted this to be heard in Ukraine, this topic to be heard in Ukraine for us to respond to Russian attacks in the best way possible, and those proposals generated by your expertise and assessments. I think this will be really useful for those who are the decisions makers, for those who are responsible for nuclear security and our success, external success. Thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you.